about the language. If you want to listen in English, please choose English from the interpretation button. And for Eastern Armenian, please choose French.
Teşekkürler. Teşekkürler.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our panel series, Civil Society Sharing Screen. During this new online panel series supported by the EU, we will be addressing the current issues in the field of civil society together with local and international civil society professionals, academics, experts, and human rights activists, as well as you. You can get more information on the topics and dates and the speakers of the panel series from our website. We will be updating our program, so we would like to see you in the next events. Please stay tuned. Before we start today's event, we want to start with a question. Please write in the chat box the answer to the question. What do you think are the responsibilities of the civil society? What comes to your mind when you think about the responsibilities of civil society? Well, in the first panel of the series, whereby we talked about services and right-based approaches in the civil society, we had Mahmut Can İsal from Support to Life Association, Elmas Arus from Zero Discrimination Association, and Hakan Ataman from the Civil Society Development Center Association. And today we are having the second panel, Civil Society Maneuver Areas. We're going to have Metin Bakkalcı from Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, Goran Miletić from Civil Rights Defenders, and Feray Salman from the Human Rights Joint Platform. And our moderator will be our distinguished professor who always supports us, Mr. Ahmet İnsel, journalist and academic, and I'll give the floor to you with that. Well, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Well, you just said that the first panel in these series of panels was about services and rights-based approaches. And in the second panel, we will talk about the fields of activities for the civil society, the maneuver areas where the civil society can expand and where it stagnates, actually, in some societies, unfortunately, or even regresses in certain fields. We will talk about the duties, the responsibilities of the civil society. So we will be exchanging our ideas and experiences together. Well, I say together, but it will be mainly our speakers who will be discussing these topics. We will be listening to their opinions and ideas about these topics, and then we will try to continue with your questions. As you know, the civil society concept became more visible after the 1980s in Turkey, and starting from the 1990s, it became a global social fact or phenomenon. We had important developments and progress. Unfortunately, in the most recent times, we are seeing a regression because of the political climate in Turkey. And in some societies during the pandemic, similarly, we have seen a regression in the civil society organizations. So, in the Western societies, there is also a setback, and people are questioning the interventions of the civil society in this field, discussing what else could be done. And on the other hand, some people see civil society as part of politics. There is a movement seeing like this, thinking that civil society and politics are intertwined and go hand in hand. And so there is this dual situation whereby on one hand we have civil society organizations carrying out activities targeting only certain fields and those who think that this should be the case. And then on the other hand, we have those who think that civil society should mainly focus on political transformation and it should be a rights-based approach. So there is a duality between these two approaches, and this is reflected on the civil society organizations as well. Sometimes these two schools of thought complement one another, and sometimes they actually diverge from one another. So my first question is for Mr. Dr. Metin Bakkalcı. As you know, a few months ago, he became the president of the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey. So congratulations are in order, I guess. Thank you. So first question is that your foundation, the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, is part of the civil society in Turkey. And looking at the developments in Turkey, how does your organization position itself? Do you think you are more empowered, more powerful compared to the past, or vice versa? How do you define the position, current position, and the future position of the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey? Okay, first of all, thank you so much. During these pandemic days, we are actually stuck with these Zoom or online meetings, but still we are using these platforms to overcome the challenges of the pandemic, because the life is not only about our homes. We need to be present everywhere outside our homes as well, especially in these dark days. And I hope brighter days will come soon. So, with your permission, in order to answer this question concretely, let me start by saying this. The Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, looking at the development of the recent history in Turkey, by the way, we can talk about different periods. We shouldn't be categorized these periods because they are intertwined. There is no clear distinction, but there are certain thresholds in terms of this field and in terms of our foundation. So let me try to answer your question from that perspective. Of course, we had the military coup of the 12th of September 1980 in Turkey. But looking at the more recent history in terms of the human rights movement, maybe we don't need to go into the conceptual discussions, but in terms of the civil society in general, which is your field of expertise, by the way, we can say that at all levels, that was an important threshold. The 1980 military coup in Turkey was the first threshold, a breaking point in Turkey, because it's also very much related to the history of our foundation as well. Right after the 1980 military coup, after a very short period of time, hundreds of thousands of people were tortured in Turkey. They were subject to torture, and over the years, these people were released. And I personally also somehow served in prison at that time. So you get damaged physically and psychologically. And you need, of course, remedies for that. And the health workers started to provide contribution to the healing process of the victims of torture. And that was an activity that was actually going on in the personal lives of the torture victims in the first half of 1980s. In the second half of 1980s, all around the world also, not only in Turkey, activities against torture became visible. There was a maturation process during that time. So this actually stemmed from the pain and sorrow of this country. Looking at our foundation, the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey's activities already had started as a network before we became an entity as a foundation. We were we needed to come together to regenerate information and knowledge. We made efforts, and I remember very clearly that many scientific studies in Turkey and around the world in terms of the treatment of torture and documentation of torture started at that time, whereby we didn't have a legal entity as the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, but we already had the activities going on. And then the Turkish Medical Association and the Human Rights Association, which was established in 1986 as one of the first institutions in this field, started to focus specifically on victims of torture and healing and treatment processes of the victims of torture. And yes, in 1990, officially the foundation was established. That was the first threshold. And of course, the damage happens to the most to those who really suffer it, and healthcare was very important, but we had this process of healing that was brought from a holistic approach. And in terms of prevention of torture also, we had some activities from day one on. We want actually to have the purpose of seeing a day whereby we would not anymore need the activities of this foundation, so that there would be no torture. Of course, we had violations of human rights in the 1980s because of the Kurdish problem as well, and the state, the government wanted to become a part of the human rights organizations. And at the international platform as well, specifically, we had more sensitive, so to speak, more focused approaches on human rights. I'm talking about the 1990s. And what I'm trying to say is that, yes, human rights foundation is already carrying out activities based on universal values. So we have a public purpose in a way. We have our own ideals, not for a designated group, but for everyone. We are working in line with universal values. So after the 1990s, starting with 2000s, between 2000 and 2004, on one hand, we had the state becoming more organized in the field of human rights. On the other hand, we had a more controlled civic space. So there was, in a way, a process of negotiation between the state and the civil society. We can define that period in Turkey like that. And in terms of our field of activity, many very valuable human rights institutions were formed and established at that time, focusing on specific themes and topics. And after 2004, a lot of data indicates that both in Turkey and around the world, maybe because of the implications of 9/11 to Turkey as well, we had a negative trend in the field of human rights, in the field of democracy in general. There was a negative or a declining trend. Well, the data shows this, and our everyday work also shows this to us. Our relation with the authorities also show this, and the international mechanisms also showed this. We had signals of something coming negatively, the state being part of these fields. So public withdrawing, the state withdrawing from the public sphere and trying to be involved in the civic space through projects or other initiatives. That was the trend. And most importantly, the space for negotiation was damaged. Maybe you would remember we had the advisory board of human rights. I was part of that. And for instance, we prepared the report on cultural rights, and the president of that advisory board was Ibrahim Kaboğlu at that time, and Baskın Oran was the head of the cultural rights board. They were litigated. back in 2004. So they tried to oppress these spaces for negotiation after 2004 in Turkey. And most recently, in 2015, we started to see the conflict arising again in Turkey and that conflict environment. And then the failed coup attempt of the 15th of July 2016 in Turkey further worsened things. So we still have the state of emergency that is actually going on in exercise, let's say at least. So the state of emergency has turned into a lasting and continuous regime. And bear in mind that almost half of the history of the Republic of Turkey was spent with extraordinary regimes, and the other half was spent with non-official extraordinary regimes, state of emergency. So there's always uncertainty, militarism, violence, securitization practices were always prevalent. And most recently, even this fight against the pandemic might turn into an issue of security. Imagine, under these circumstances, we are seeing an environment whereby the violation of human rights is the practice and protection of rights becomes rare. So in the 1990s, we were trying to prove that the rights were violated, but nowadays we are actually going through a reconstruction of a rights-based regime. Individuals are no longer agents. They don't have rights anymore. So you can become an individual with your rights, right? Human rights. So you are no longer an individual if you don't have your rights. So we are seeing the examples of this everywhere. We are all witnessing many examples of this ourselves also. So in the public sphere, civic sphere, there is a great shrinkage. So they are shrinking the civic space and destroying the values, human rights values, and the international mechanisms, which I will be talking about in the second round. Those mechanisms are made dysfunctional. So we are really going through a real crisis. And that intermediate space between the state and civil society, such as law, negotiation, they have been totally dissolved. And if we're talking about the human rights issue, because of its definition, the possible violator is the state. So what we're dealing with is the violations by the state. But now there is an interface. There is no longer an interface. So we are directly facing the state in front of us. With your permission, maybe at this point I can, okay, you have a couple of more minutes left, then I will ask the same question to the other speakers, if you can wrap up for the first round. Okay, from our perspective, we can say that because of this repression or oppression in Turkey, we need the international mechanisms more. We need to get our strength from the international mechanisms, but there is also a problem regarding other countries. So what I want to say as a last word is that during all this process, in this oppressive environment, first, we are trying to do what we do in a better way, and we are not trying to withdraw to ourselves, but we want to expand our field of activity based on the universal values. That's the target. And I have to say that we're taking steps towards that purpose. We are expanding our field of activity by, of course, protecting our main functions. We are building on that knowledge and experience. We are not trying to work in every field. So, with your permission, I will stop here.
I would like to remind you that we have to restrict our answers to 10 minutes. So you can use only 10 minutes to answer the questions. This way we can evenly distribute the limited time slot we have for the speakers. I would like to turn to Goran Milevich. from Civil Rights Defender, Mr. Goran Miletic from Stockholm. As far as I know, he is in charge of Western Balkans, working as the program director for the Western Balkans. This is a very important initiative established in 1982. As Metin Bey, the previous speaker, was telling us about those years, 1980s, those were the times when the civil society was under severe repression back then. So during those times in Stockholm, this important initiative was established, Civil Rights Defenders, represented by Mr. Goran Miletic. We would like to turn to him with the following question. Considering civil society initiatives since 1980s, regarding their development since then, what could be said about the Western Balkans? I know you were trained in Sarajevo and you are familiar with the Serbia issue. So how about the situation in the Western Balkans and in Europe and globally? What is your take on the development of civil society movement since then? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation. And at the very beginning, I want to say a big thank you to interpreters who hopefully will be able to translate me, because I'm speaking quite fast often. I must say that before 80s, not only in the Balkans, but in the whole Europe, we were always asking questions as a civil society, how we will follow implementation of international human rights standards, how we will be able to prove that countries are violating human rights and to press them to respect human rights standards. And then after 80s or let's say 80s or 90s, world became finally global. Everything became quite close. And for example, wars that happened in the Balkans during the 90s became visible. Violation of human rights and international humanitarian law became visible to the whole world. This was something that never happened before. So it was quite fast. Everything was easy to show. Everything was easy. It was relatively easier to collect evidences and to present to the whole world. But what was important in that time? That time, it was important only to have facts, to collect evidences, to monitor, to collect evidences, and to establish facts. That was 80s, maybe 90s, maybe even 2000. But what's happened today? What is the biggest change today? And I think that this pandemic is the last phase of the big change that we had in past, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years or so on. The populism is the key change that we have in our world. That's what we have in the Balkans. That's what we have even in Europe. You have Hungary, Poland. You know also the good thing. It's not only populist movement. It's or political parties. It's also the case what is connected to that. The first thing that was a victim of those populism is actually truth. Are the facts that we were always collecting. So our job was quite simple before. We collect some facts, we present report, and then people based on report, they formulate opinion and they know what's happened. But now populists is misusing facts, or they are presenting fake information, or they are simply producing some narrative that has no connection with the facts, or has a connection with very few facts. So this is a biggest change for us who are working both in the Balkans, but in Europe, for you guys and for everyone around the globe, even in the United States, who was a kind of leader before. So that's the first thing. Second is rhetoric that is far-wing rhetoric became quite strong. Before that rhetoric was quite, let's say, it was not that visible. It was small, and it was somewhere on some small parts of society was really far right. And we were even sometimes laughing at those guys. We were saying, well, you see, those guys, no one is listening to them. It's a small group of people. But those far-wing forces are now very, very stronger. Another phenomenon that's happened, and we are living right now, it's a digital tool. Everything is digital now. at the moment. Even this meeting, if you asked me 5 years ago, is it possible to have such meeting or such a conference, online, I will always say no. It's not possible to have a big and important event online. But here we are. For a year, we are doing that. Civil society is stronger, initially stronger than government when it comes to digital or internet world. We are stronger. But sometimes government is trying, not sometimes, often is trying to obstruct that, and regressive forces and populist forces is trying to do the opposite and to obstruct our advantage. And another thing that is also important, instead of facts and truth, emotions became a key. In social media, everything is not to write that 15 people were beaten on the street. Everything is emotion. It's emotional story of one person, what's happened to one person. And I think that human rights organizations realize this. It is a problem actually for us since 5 years or maybe 10 years ago, that everything became very emotional, and it's very easy sometimes for some organization to pass the line when things are not truth, when you put a lot of proverbs and not just focus on fact. And there is a lot of simplification that is happening during these days. So you cannot be in your report detailed as you were in 80s or 90s. When you read some report that time, some very big reports and so on, young generations are not interested often to read reports that are now produced by human rights organizations. They want just summaries of those reports. So as you can see, context of our work change, not only in the Balkans, I think change globally, change everywhere. In every country around the globe, things change. And I think pandemic was the last thing to change. However, there is a lot of advantages. Of course, street protests you can organize much easier. You can formulate demands that you will, one group of people can formulate very easily some action and what they will do, how they will react. That's good. That's something positive, but that's not enough. That's not enough, and these reactions are not something that will be, that will lead the whole process of changes in the future. We are still trying to find as civil society ways how to adjust and what to do, which kind of relation to have to the government, because government is trying much more than before to have gongos, to have their own organizations, and to obstruct the work of civil society is doing. That's what we have in the Balkans. That's what we have in Europe. But I guess that you can also have the similar experiences. But I think that all those things that I mentioned, digital area, populism, firing, emotions, those are some things where we as a civil society are working today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Teşekkür ederim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miletic. What a valuable assessment you have given us. Thank you. It was quite interesting. It was a very good summary of the current situation. While listening to you, we continue to get further questions and views that are quite relevant to the points you have made in your intervention. While speaking to you, I'm also trying to scan through those, and we will be wrapping them up before the end of the session. Now, I would like to move on with Ms. Feray Salman from Human Rights Joint Platform. She is working as the coordinator in the joint platform, which was established in 2005. It was, as it was said, one of the watershed moments in the history of civil society movements in Turkey. As far as I remember, it started as a joint project of 5 associations: Mazlum Der, Helsinki Citizens Associations, Turkey's Human Rights Foundation, Amnesty International Turkey office came together, started this joint initiative, and that is still working actively in the field of civil society. And you are the coordinator. It's over to you. Thank you very much for organizing such important meetings. I'd like to thank Hrant Dink Foundation. This is a very, very relevant topic these days. As we speak now, the parliament in Turkey is holding a parliamentary debate on a draft law that is going to influence the civil society in Turkey immensely. Maybe that will be the last blow, or probably the not last blow. There have been a series of blows, unfortunately. Before I go ahead, I'd like to make a little correction. This is not Human Rights Joint Project. This is a Human Rights Joint Platform. No hard feelings, just a small correction. I just try to prevent any misunderstanding. This is a joint platform. Well, of course, anything could be considered as a project, right? In that sense, what you said is correct. Whereas our platform is called Human Rights Joint Platform. So it's not a project. I just wanted to make this minor correction. Because project reminds one of an initiative valid for a limited period of time, whereas ours is not something like that. This joint platform was the ideal, owned by many civil society organizations, and so this came to life in 2005. It coincides with some critical moments in Turkey, 2005. It's one of the milestones in Turkish history because Turkey has become a part of the opening process, referring to a candidacy to the EU, regarding the EU accession process. And around those times, our joint platform was established, and this remains one of our key agenda items. Whereas in general terms, this is not just what we do. Before this platform was established, back in 1990s, as it was very well summarized. Back in 1990s, we all agree that those were the critical times for Turkey, also internationally, with respect to the civil society. Becoming more international, opening up internationally. On the one hand, there were authoritarian regimes. On the other hand, democratic institutions were flourishing. Human rights organizations were reshaping themselves back then. 1992, as far as I remember, 1992 World Human Rights Conference was a watershed moment. There were such important human rights mechanisms with increased presence of civil society with very important consequences. Habitat, likewise, followed that. So this increased the diversity in the civil society back then and made civil society stronger. But at the same time, in such countries as Turkey, we should also say back then, more than 2/3 of the population was living under state of emergency conditions, and civil society had to set up solidarity networks to stand on its own feet under difficult conditions. When you think of Helsinki Citizens Association, while the intercity brotherhood, sisterhood issue was an important one, there were serious repression as a continuation of 1980. Anti-terror law entered into force in 1991, and it was very repressive. So those were the times when the civil society was trying hard to stand on its own feet, build its own base, in difficult conditions. And I should also refer to the Kurdish issue. We tried to set up brother and sister cities. We tried to make the voice of the civil society heard. We tried to come together. The civil society tried to intervene and started to build a strength. In that sense, it's a great experience to set this joint platform up based on the experiences we acquired from the past. This also refers to the accession process of Turkey, candidacy of Turkey to the EU, and harmonization with the EU acquis, democratization packages that entered into force. This influenced all of us.
Bir alan haline gelmesi sağlanabilir.
We were trying to make sure we have a better livable life. So this is how we try to collectively intervene in this process through the joint platform. So we've been active in this platform for the past 16, 17 years. And political scene in Turkey has changed. In 2010, Muslim Bar Association became an important actor, and they withdrew from the joint platform back then. And the process continued at the same time. Turkey had some problematic areas from our viewpoint. I mean, from the perspective of human rights, with my Human Rights Association background, I should say
kuvvet oluşturma meselesi, Türkiye'nin temel meseleleri üzerinde daha güçlü ses çıkarabilmek.
Civil society's willingness to raise a joint voice was possible until 2009. We had such a space to coexist and raise our voice together until 2009. Turkey had some problematic areas and fundamental problems. We still have. For example, anti-discrimination and equality law, draft law. 100 civil society organizations were mobilized by our joint platform to contribute to this law, draft law. Working together, mobilization, we were trying to strengthen this practice. We came up with a proposal, law proposal, and it was cribbed and cropped here and there, and a part of that is reflected in the main law. But the law as it is now, it doesn't have much to do with the proposal we originally came up with. Anyways, in 2013, you know, the breakout of Gezi protests, 2015 was another important date. Curfew was announced, and 2016 was the year of state of emergency. Between 2016 and 18, 130,000 people were officially suspended, and so many were also suspended, but it was not officially declared. So this is totally against law. More than 1,400 civil society organizations. Oh yes, they were organizations, regardless of who they are, who they were. That's another question, but some of them were human rights defenders. So many of them were closed. So many organizations were closed. And trustees were appointed to municipalities afterwards. Such an extraordinary practice has become a routine. And this suffocated the civil society immensely. Until then, things were considered to be more normal. We thought we had the space to breathe, but then it turned out it was not the case. Then came 2018. Since 2018, ever-growing authoritarian regimes, which has become even stronger and stronger.
döşendiği ve halen daha döşenmeye devam ettiği bir alan içerisindeyiz.
It's started to become an established practice. By the way, I'm hopeful. I'm not at all in favor of giving up, no, but one needs to understand. Sure, I'll wrap up. Excuse me. Were you saying something? Is the time up? Yes, just one last minute. I think accidentally a listener turned on the microphone. Okay, I will wrap up in 1 minute. One other thing that influences us is September 11. After the September 11 case, the global atmosphere was dominated by security policies. And the reflection in Turkey is quite obvious. At the end of 2020, I thought that was the last drop in the bucket, but it turned out it was not the case. That was even worse. Financial action force. You know, there is such an action force relating to the security policies of the UN. They came up with some recommendations, and because of their recommendations, also due to other reasons, civil society was, in a sense, driven to a corner. Such a severe inspection was imposed on the civil society because of those recommendations. This is what is happening at the moment. From the viewpoint of the Human Rights Joint Platform, we are all trying to enlarge our space, trying to come up with tools that will help us to enlarge that space. I think I need to stop here and we will continue later. One last thing, with your permission. This is what is happening at the moment. And some associations describe, some civil society organizations describe themselves as organizations based on rights. Some are giving out donations. We have a big problem of refugees in Turkey. Some organizations, especially in the field of human rights, are faced with dire situations. So we need to understand that. And we have to maintain what we have in our hands, and we have to enlarge that space. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Feray Salman. The second question actually relates to that. The boundaries, problems, limitations for the future, we want to dwell on these. Unfortunately, in Turkey, most recently, it's never possible to say that, oh, we have seen the worst, because there is always something even worse. It can even get much worse. And that, of course, should not lead to pessimism and totally giving up. So we need to take action as well. So let me turn to Mr. Metin as well. Please answer this question in 8 to 10 minutes. We have actually drawn or giving you a snapshot of Turkey, and Goran Miletic also talked about the international experience, the boundaries he defined. And on a more concrete level, as a civil society organization, I mean, you're representing Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, what do you think about the relations with the donors, the organizations that provide the funds, the donor organizations, and your relations with the beneficiaries of your services? Can you please make an assessment of your relations with these two bodies, with the donor organizations and the people you provide services to? How things are changing and evolving in terms of your roles, responsibilities, and boundaries? The speaker is muted. Yes, Mr. Metin, can you unmute yourself? Okay. Yes, in terms of responsibilities, because this is also the topic of the panel, duties and responsibilities. First of all, I will talk about the experience of the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, of course. If we're talking about human rights, then there is already a main paradox, a main problem. Because in terms of protecting and strengthening human rights, it's directly the duty of the governments, the states. They have the responsibility to promote and protect human rights. But if we're talking about human rights violations, then again, the potential offender, the violator, is the state who needs to protect and promote these very rights. So that is actually a process that has marked itself on entirety of our activities. State, on one hand, is the protector, and on the other hand, it's the violator, the offender as well. So, to put it in another way, how can a violator be a protector or promoter as well? That is the dilemma. Well, I won't go into the details, but to overcome this dilemma, we need effective and efficient participation and engagement of the society. Well, we are active agents and individuals in this society. We are not passive people. If there is a violation, then we have a relation that is not only limited between the violator and the victim. If we liberalize everything, of course, violations will increase. If we are actively involved and engaged, then the violations will decline. So, again, speaking of the government or the state, these people are actually fulfilling the duties assigned by us, by the society. So it's the society that assigns the duties to the officials, and we also have to give certain responsibilities to them. Those responsibilities are the following. For instance, we say for our safety and security, yes, maybe you can impose certain restrictions on the liberties and freedom of certain people, but you also have the obligation to protect their rights. So as the entire society, we also have another responsibility, which is to actively watchdog this entire process. So the result is that in terms of these responsibilities, we need to take an active stance and be involved actively. That's the implicit duty that we have. We as the human rights organizations, we have our duties, but at the end of the day, we have a person who is subject to a violation, be it torture or something else. So in terms of finding a remedy to compensate for the loss or the damage that person has incurred, we have to do certain things, just like Goran has said. We watch these processes, document them, we make efforts so that they will be prevented and never happen again. And of course, as far as we have that space in between, that intermediate space I talked about, we can also have transformation. The human rights movement appeals to policies as well. So that interaction between the political sphere and the civil sphere might be a discussion for another event maybe, but we have to also keep that in mind. A third dimension is that as of today, let's speak about what's happening more recently. If there is a total crackdown on the civic space, and then we can say that the civil society organizations need to assume another function, which is a function of transformation. By the way, the human rights movement is a transformative movement. By the way, rights also transform. They are not stable and stagnant. Universally speaking, they also need to transform. So the human rights movement needs to have this approach to reconstruct the public sphere. We also have that responsibility. That's what we discuss. That's what we work for. And this is not important only for Turkey. This human rights crisis, if it's valid for the entire world, which we think it is, because I talked about the international mechanisms in the first round, I remember very clearly in the 1990s and the beginning of 2000s, we saw the international institutions as an approval authority for us to say that, yes, your rights are violated. But imagine the rights, the Roboski decision or the decision of the victims of the events in Cizre. Think about those rulings or the other decisions after the state of emergency process. Now the repressive regimes are now in a way legitimizing themselves through these institutional mechanisms, international institutional mechanisms. They are turning into such mechanisms. So not only at the local level, but at the international level, again, as mentioned by my colleagues, we need to, by the way, I'm wrapping up, base ourselves on universal values and scientific knowledge to have solidarity and to, of course, intervene in everyday life actively. And we need to use more creative ways. And this has been my 9th minute, so exactly I abided by my time because in the first round I took more of your time. I'm sorry for that. But let me conclude here.
Teşekkür ederim.
Thank you.
Bu konuşmaları mükemmel şekilde çeviren...
Yes, by the way, we would like to thank our interpreters who are doing a wonderful job. I was listening to them. I was testing them actually, if the interpreters were able to speak your fast speech, but they are doing a wonderful job. They are doing it very well. So I tested the interpreters and I would like to thank them in advance. Before closing, okay, I also would like to apologize and thank the interpreters. No, they are doing a wonderful job. Thank you. Okay, Goran, I will turn to you, Goran Miletić. From your perspective, the civil society organizations and their experiences and their relations with the donor organizations, the funding organizations, how is it? By the way, it's a very important function. Some of the civil society organizations also function as donor organizations, right? There is also a confusion over there, internationally speaking. How do you see the relations between the CSOs and the funding agencies, organizations? Sometimes these funding agencies provide opportunities and create dependency, maybe, right? So what is your take on this? What kind of new responsibilities does it bring, and also new boundaries and borders or limitations does it impose?
I think that we need separate conference about this question. This question you asked me now. I mean, because I have really a lot of experiences. First, I was working with regional human rights organization. Now I'm working in an organization that is really human rights organization in Sweden, but we are working globally. But we are also supporting local human rights defenders. So I think my key thing is always when I have such question is that we are too much idealistic. We have too much expectations from the civil society or from human rights organization, and in the same time, too much expectations from the donor organizations. First, what human rights organizations are not? First, human rights organizations are not states. Human rights organizations cannot exist instead of state. They cannot implement laws and human rights standards instead of state. So human rights organization or civil society organization is what it is. It's not the state. It cannot be instead of state. It's also sometimes there are expectations that organizations can do something instead of victims. Victims sometimes, or citizens, don't want to report human rights violations sometimes. Not sometimes, often they don't want. And we cannot press them. If they don't want, they don't want. So this is another thing, and there is expectation, why you didn't do this, why you didn't do that. But sometimes victims or citizens don't want that. There is also, we are not political parties. We are not dealing, you mentioned that in introduction, but I think that human rights organization is not political. Political sphere is something different. Also, we are not dealing both human rights organization or civil society, and donors are not dealing with unlimited funds. So there is some kind of idea that there is some donor or there is some human rights organization who has unlimited money, that there is an organization in this world that can do anything he wants. I mean, basically, there is no such human rights organization, civil society organization, or donor who has unlimited amount of money. So everyone are making priorities. That's very, very important to understand. And also, when it comes to that, we are always working under some security security and concerns that always exist. And the question, if we will have enough funds, if we will have the funds tomorrow. So there is a lot of expectations in such world, both from human rights organization and from donor organization. And I must say that both organizations expect the donors are ideal. They understand what they are doing, and donors are expecting that organizations are always understanding what is their strategy, what are their priorities, and so on. And interpretation is always the key. How donors interpret the work that organizations are doing on the field, and how organizations on the field interpret what donors want, what donors need to achieve. Also, there is a very big danger of how to say simplification or prejudice when it comes to donor. Not all donors are the same. All donors, every donor is different. I cannot find 2 or 3 donors that are the same. Embassies are one. Private donors, private foundations are similar, different. Then you have local or regional foundations. Then you have some intermediary donors. You have a lot of different donors, and they have different strategies and different needs. So from my perspective and from our perspective, the very close relations are the key of our work. We always have a close relations to our partners on the field, everywhere where we work. But not all donors, that's us. But other donors has very distant relations. You apply to some call, and then during the year you are sending to some person that never saw you, you are sending some reports or progress reports, and you never meet that donor. Our idea is to meet our partners as much as possible and to provide something that is not only money, to be there, to be always there for our partners. So this is our logic of work. But many of our colleagues that I know are not like that. They just want to do it once a year and to meet partners once in 3 years, and that's completely different. So and also depends from country to country how donors work. So it is very different. Responsibilities exist. Responsibility exists. But unfortunately, again, I cannot generalize, because you have from the perspective when someone is donor, you have a lot of misuse of funds in different regions, in different countries around the globe. But in the same time, you have a lack of capacities within some organization to report and to provide good report. So its situation is not that simple. We like to simplify the situation. We would like to see all donors like the same and all human rights organizations or civil society organizations like the same. But situation is not like that in reality. Situation is quite human in both donor organization and human rights organization, civil society organization. Human beings are working, and a lot depend on human beings. It can happen that very good organization became not that good over the night because people change, and the same happened with donor organization. Some good person who understand the context, who understand the situation, change, and then that donor organization is not maybe that good. So everything depends on people. I think in both cases, and I think we need more understanding and not to have that idealistic picture always in our head. So I think this is the key responsibility that we have. I can talk you more about responsibility when it comes to reporting, to financial things, or when it comes to from donor perspective to understand, what are priorities and so on. But I think this is too much for such conference. So I think I should stop here. This is my 10 minutes. Thank you.
Teşekkür ederim Goran Miletić. Zaten birkaç soru ile...
Thank you. Goran Miletic. We also started to receive some questions from the audience. Mr. Insel is muted. We are not able to hear him. I'm sorry, he says. Yes, we will be receiving some questions, so maybe we can further expand the discussion concretely. We are receiving some questions from the audience about the positions of the people working at the human rights organizations. Now I will turn to Human Rights Joint Platform. So you also gave me a lot of food for thought by correcting me. Yes, Ms. Feray, I will ask the same question to you as well, based on your own experience, because you actually act as a coordinator, right? Your platform is a coordinator as well. So we're not talking about the activities of one single association or institution, but many different organizations, which is an entire different experience in itself. We are not familiar with that. So normally, civil society organizations define themselves with the activities that they carry out. So this gives you a wider perspective, I think, being a platform. So in that framework, can you talk about the duties, responsibilities, and in a broader sense, what are the new challenges, not only in Turkey, but also around the world?
This is a giant question that cannot be squeezed into 10 minutes. I will do my best to squeeze it into 10 minutes. You could call this a network or a coalition or a platform, whatever it is, whatever you call it. I want to refer to it. In Turkey, in order to claim the solution of a problem that hasn't been solved, there are groups that come together, like for Roboski, people come together to ask for a solution. And Human Rights Joint Platform is such an example that came together to try to find a solution to important problems. And this emerged as a response to a need, impunity, or problems encountered by the refugees. Those were some of the problems we wanted to tackle. We wanted to join forces. Joining forces is very important. And first of all, when you establish such platforms or joint efforts, different actors come together with no hierarchy. No one is superior to the other one. Everyone has equal voice, equal weight in this joint initiative. And if you talk about a joint initiative, everyone has to agree on it. That is one. Since 2013, one platform that emerged out of our platform is working against impunity. They specifically work in the field of impunity. Individuals and organizations come together against impunity. Another example is for refugee rights. This is a working group that turned into a network later on. These are autonomous structures and joint efforts. I believe we, first of all, uphold important principles, jointly agreed principles. We had to come together to jointly decide on those principles to uphold them in the first place. During the state of emergency, a member of our platform got closed down, but that didn't hamper our partnership. At that time, our member organizations were impacted. Some of them were arrested in the process. And we were trying to give an answer, give a reaction against those. And rather than giving individual responses, coming together, it makes a big difference because you can then give a joint response. So one important thing is to stand against hierarchy, especially in the field of civil society. There shouldn't be any hierarchy. Everyone should have equal voice and say. And everyone's voice must be valued. And we should enjoy peaceful discussion areas. That's very important.
Zaman zaman böyle sekreteryasında odaklanan ve ayrı kendi başına bir örgütmüş.
These platforms need secretariat work, and I work for the secretariat of this platform. This secretariat works for all the members, and this is where we raise a joint voice, and we're trying to disseminate such a culture. I know we have shortcomings, and we're doing our best. And we know all the organizations who are a part of this questions themselves. They stretch their limits and uphold the principles, try to overcome their shortcomings. This is such an environment. So these are important with respect to our responsibilities vis-a-vis our members and the entire human rights movement. As Metin said, human rights organizations and rights-based organizations, by the way, these days, lots of people claim they are rights-based organizations, but not all of them are. I'm referring to the real ones, and the real ones have an important duty to cause change and drive the change. This is very valuable in Turkey. We should concentrate mostly on this item. We should change. And it's a responsibility of us. We should create change. We need to be questioning this and implementing it. I'm aware that we do have shortcomings, though. I want to move to the financing aspect. In Turkey, this deserves a long debate. But regarding participation, regarding accession of Turkey to the EU, we had to go through this preparation. And the highlight was the IPA structural funds aimed at transforming Turkey. But in the distribution of the funds, something important happened that still influences our today. These funds mostly were channeled to the public institutions. I'm not saying civil society was not given support, but mostly the funds were channeled to the public institutions. For example, the Ministry of Family and Social Policies, Ministry of Energy were given the funds. And as a part of that transfer, a subcategory was transferred as grants to civil society. This is an important distinction. We need to discern the difference here. This created some problems. We had to set up some operational cooperations among civil society organizations, but this caused some problems. For example, unless you are given an approval, you cannot bring an issue to the attention of public institutions. As Mr. Miletic mentioned, we want to reveal fundamental problems. We want to bring it before the eyes of the public to ask for its solution And our role is to find a way out. And that is why we enter into solidarity with each other. But during this accession process, let's say for the past 15 years, civil society organizations were given only a subcategory of the funds transferred by the EU. And the civil society, as we mean here, act as agents. They're not large in numbers, but in the field, as the drivers of change, we do talk about agents of change, and it is very important for the funds to reach the end beneficiaries. We need to consider what influence they create on the lives of people. Mostly in Turkey, unfortunately, these efforts are not followed up with impact analysis. We don't know the outcome of the transfers. What kind of a transformation the civil society has gone through, it remains uncertain. As to the rest of this issue, well, I should say the legislation limits us. We have such a limiting law on associations, very restrictive. Many activities of the civil society are subject to approval. So the only way out is for civil society to get foreign funds, external funds. By the way, when you think of the Ministry of Interior, the money, the fund is transferred to the General Directorate on Development of Civil Society under the Ministry of Interior. Well, for the rights and freedoms, for the sake of change. In order to preserve the rights and freedoms, in order to ensure equal access to services and rights, we need resources. How about access to those resources? The government has restrictive policies, and actually there is a huge gap between the public institutions who have the access to those funds, and the gap between them and the civil society, who are the agents in this field. Thank you very much for this important analysis. Very important points you've made, especially for Turkey, where we talk about an ever stronger authoritarian regime that mechanically suffocates the civil society space. Civil rights are under restriction. In the third phase, well, taking this into consideration, let's delve deeper into this issue. This brings me to the following question I want to address Metin Bey. Well, we talk about a group of social problems. Some are political problems. Some are political and social problems. They're intertwined, actually. And an aspect of the problem is about the political actors. These sometimes intersect. Sometimes political actors have direct influence on civil societies, especially if they guide the activities of the civil society in their own favor. Civil society is considered as a part of the politics by some circles. Some circles see civil society completely as a tool for the politics. These are usually backed by the government. That is one, on the one hand. And on the other hand, some circles consider autonomous actors guide the sphere of civil society. These are the two approaches, the two different approaches And in between, sometimes there's a tension. And this tension influences, this contradiction influences the end beneficiaries of civil society work. What is your take on this? Would you like to share with us your suggestions? Microphone is muted.
İmze dayalı zaten paylaşımda bulunabilir. Edersiniz ki hep beraber de aslında katılımcı.
I'd like to share with you my personal views on this. I think we're getting close to the last part, so let me say I would like to turn to positive sides because I have been talking about the negative sides since the beginning. Now I'd like to turn to the positive aspects. Think of our daily lives. Individually, we are all influenced by what is happening around us, not just in Turkey, but globally. And these are all caused by humans. Done by humans. Anything done by humans is a preventable thing. Please ponder on this for a while. Yes, so far we have made important efforts, although they're not enough. We haven't been enough. This doesn't mean what we will do in the future won't be enough. Okay, the situation is very restrictive, there is this and that, but this doesn't mean we cannot achieve it. So this is what I would like to say in the time given to me in the last part. What we are discussing deserves a long debate, but I'm not going to take too much time. First of all, it is very important for all circles to express themselves jointly together in an organized way. This is a part of their fundamental rights. People also can come together around some common interests. This is their freedom. This is obvious. And I wish they all adopted a rights-based approach. To what extent this is happening? Well, that's another question. So there are such efforts in the field of human rights movements. And we need to discern the following thing. With respect to the human rights, we're not serving a special interest, a specific interest. This problem has to do with public interest, regardless of any identities. Of course, all identities are important, valuable, but one cannot universalize identities. One can universalize values. Values can be universal. In Turkey and globally, these values suffer significant damages. So let me come back to the initial sentence I uttered. Human rights should be the fundamental starting point for all of us. This should be the case in the political areas, in other areas. It should all be rights-based. There shouldn't be a tension in between. When we talk about human rights organizations, they are built on universal values and principles. We could be biased. Yes, it could be debated. We are aware of this. But here, we're basically talking about highlighting those universal principles and values. So the overarching value should be the human rights. This should be fortified. Otherwise, yes, we could have lots of justifications, explanations. Yes, the area is very restricted, very much restricted. Whether it be political, civilian, I think one cannot put the whole responsibility on the shoulders of the human rights organizations. The civilian and public space is suffocated under significant restriction at this moment in time. Of course, this also influences human rights organizations. And this is not free of political influence. That's not possible. But some are closed down, and this causes politicization. This is a risk, politicization risk. We need to consider that risk. And it's important to minimize these risks. And how can we do that? We need to have independent structures built on universal values and principles. That should be the way out. That is my take, and that is why we would like to work toward that direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You already received some questions actually in the chat box. So I will refer the same question to Goran Miletic as well. So in the previous round, you said human rights organizations are not political organizations, right? Did I understand you correctly? So you said that. So some of the human rights organizations define themselves as assistance organizations in the political field, and some define themselves as active in the civil field. And this also shows that there is a different definition of civil society by different civil society organizations. So in this tension, let's say, we have the political space and the civil space, which is in conflict, which is conflicting, if we look at it that way. Then civil society organizations and their responsibilities and boundaries, how do you assess them? How do you assess their responsibilities within this conflict? And is there a difference between different countries? Because every country has its own norms and traditions. So maybe we will not be able to universalize it.
Yeah, I think there are many type of organizations. I mean that belong to civil society. So you have different theories, of course. But some people say that even religious organizations or sport organizations or many other associations belong to the civil society. So civil society is much wider. Human rights organizations are just one part of that civil society. And I think that especially human rights organization must stay impartial and far away from the involvement in political life in one way. However, it is idealistic and it is completely wrong that believe that human rights organization can be fully neutral in the society. Members of civil society organization, human rights organization are human beings who belong to the society, and we all belong to the society, and we are part of the society. So we cannot be 100% neutral and so on. So in, let's say, almost ideal societies like Sweden, where I'm sitting now, what is happening here? And then I compare with the societies that are, let's say, transitional, like Turkey, like Balkans, like even some really lot of more repressive societies in other parts of the world. Here, it's very clear you should not be how to say in any way involved in political life. You are doing your human rights work. That's one thing, and that's completely clear. However, you are always sitting with political parties and asking them to do what you see that they should do in the country, internally, and outside the country, that they should advocate human rights outside the country. Of course, with whom you are not sitting is the political parties that are not having human rights values in their program. So there is Swedish Democrats here who are anti-immigrant political party and who are not that happy with human rights. But of course, they are changing because it's not possible in such society to stay for long and not to respect human rights fully. So despite the fact that political parties are quite different. So you are sitting in the same table with political parties here in Sweden. The question is, in which moment you are staying away from the table? In which moment in one society you are not talking to the government anymore? When is that moment? And for example, from my experience in the Balkans, it's very, very hard. It's very hard because if you want to organize gay parade, I mean, you need to sit with the government because they can guarantee you security. In some other moments, when they are beating the people who demonstrate, you cannot sit with them. They basically, because police officers commit torture. So it's very hard to have that moment, that line when you are sitting with the government and in the line when you're not sitting with the government officials anymore because they violate human rights. So this is the tricky part. It is not tricky part when you have an ideal world, when human rights organizations are independent, like I have here in Sweden, and we are writing policies and we are demanding from the government to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And government must do this because media are on our side and media are pressing governments to do what we as an expert organization say that must be done in relation to racism in Sweden, in relation to migration, in relation to discrimination and so on. This is a bit ideal world from us, from the, let's say, Balkans or let's say maybe southern countries or whatever you call it. So it's completely different situation. So it depends, a lot of depends on society, and civil society is part of society. We should not forget that whatever we do as a human rights organization, that every report we are doing, every statement in media, whatever we do have to some extent impact on society. And that we create some kind of opinion changing, or we are part of democracy, as you want, because we influence some opinions and so on. So we cannot say that we are completely neutral and independent and so on. So this is just we should get rid of those idealistic pictures. But I think at the end, that organization must stay away from the politics because they will either become gongos, like governmental control organization. Sometimes they can be politically connected to organization, which is quite often. Some political parties create organization or can be connected to commercial interest. I must say that in ideal societies, being connected to the political parties is not necessarily something bad. You have many organizations in, let's say, in EU that are connected to some political parties in one society, and that's not necessarily bad. They are doing sometimes even good work supporting partners somewhere abroad, and that's not necessarily bad. But we always need to be careful if organization is independent or not. And why again we should not again be disconnected, because the whole story. Citizens in democracy, citizens participate in political life. So the whole point is that we have as much participation of citizens in political life as possible. And civil society actors are just group of citizens, nothing else. So this is it. And human rights organizations are a group of citizens who advocate human rights and who monitor human rights and who are insisting that human rights standards are implemented. So we cannot be just like that independent superficially and saying that we are not part of society, because we are, and there is a lot of interconnection with the political life. To be honest, I'm coming from Serbia, and sometimes when we are lobbying for some laws, we don't know what position of political parties will be. We often have no idea how what position will different political parties have. We know for this extreme right political parties that they will probably be negative, but all others, including ruling party that has like almost 200 seats in the parliament out of 250, so they are predominantly in the parliament. We don't know, we don't have idea how they will vote and if they will support adoption of some measure, adoption of some policy, or adoption of some law. So this question is really tricky. It's not that simple question, but I must say that we should stay away from the politics, but we should be realistic that our influence on the civic life and the political life, let's say in one society, exists. So this is some kind of my conclusion. Thank you.
Teşekkür ederim. Bunu
thank you. I think in the literature of political science, this is defined as the difference between the political sphere and political activities, because not all political activities might necessarily have a political aim. Okay, with that, I will turn to Feray and ask the same question. Again, please answer in line with your experiences. This tension, you're right in the middle of that tension, by the way, in Turkey, because your platform is dealing with the state, the relevant government institutions working in the fields of human rights. You are in close contact with them. So you are in the middle of a very serious tension over there. So how do you deal with that? What are the problems that you're facing? Well, of course, at this point in time, I can say that when we look at the 2005 period, all the way up to the 2009 period, where we challenged everyone to have closer consultations, and those who had the capacity to change certain things, we tried to develop tools and instruments to be effective on those institutions, because the main issue is all about to which institution we are approaching and on behalf of which group. This is very important. You may be approaching a certain institution on behalf of the refugees, for instance. It might be an issue about the refugees that we're dealing with the ruling party. Or we want to ask the ruling party to cancel a certain practice regarding refugees. We need to be able to know where we can come to an agreement and where we cannot come to an agreement. So the individuals that we are defending or advocating for are important in terms of overcoming the challenges in your approach. Since the beginning, since our establishment, actually, what we have been doing is to work for the establishment of a national human rights institution. Yes, it's a public institution within the public administration, but in terms of human rights and freedoms, it should be an independent institution, an independent structure. We really worked hard for that, and in that struggle, in that effort, there were many failures, of course, and then there were minor changes, but now at this point in time, we no longer have such relations with the public authorities. Of course, we go to the parliament to voice our demands, and with all the political parties, well, I cannot say all, because we are not dealing that much with a party that defends racism. Actually, this is right against our values, right? So, of course, there is no such thing as you cannot negotiate or have talks with the ruling party. No, your relations with the ruling party or all political parties for that purpose Is it for the purpose of showing them what is right, or is it for the purpose of working on gender equality within political parties? For instance, imagine a party that has approved equality, and the women's organizations might be working with that political party. Is it considered as agreeing with that ideology? No. I think what you are doing is important, and why you are doing it is important. Why are you having a contact with the political party? Please do not misunderstand me. I'm not saying it's a negative thing. We now need to have a certain map in front of us. In that map, we need to able to see that currently the public administration, with the changing regime, with the changing constitution, and I don't even know what that regime is called, but with that strongman regime, let's say, one person in power, holding all the power, all the resources, deciding on everything, not listening to anybody else. That's, of course, in such an environment, you cannot have any relationship or a mutual relationship with the political parties. And I think we're exactly sitting at that crossroads. And when we say political parties, well, can they not establish associations for their own ideologies? Yes, we have examples of such organizations established in Germany and other countries. But to what extent does this contribute to the social space is a totally different discussion than the human rights movement. But the civil space, the civic space is different. When we look at the civic space in Turkey, we're also talking about communities, religious communities, right? Are we going to neglect them, religious communities? No, we cannot. So looking at them and the things that they defend, advocate for, some of them are supporting the government, some of them are not. So this is a huge space when we say the civil space. Turkey is a big country, but looking from the perspective of the human rights organizations, we can say that human rights organizations are independent. They uphold the values of human rights to protect the human dignity for everyone. So for this to happen, they can also send representatives to political parties to influence political parties as well. And it means that that civil society organization is not connected to that political party. No, it doesn't mean that. But when we look at the policies, we see that every statement we make is continuously referenced by someone. Oh, that is a reference to that political party, that is a reference to that political party. There is always in the background a discourse, a narrative imposed upon us, which also marginalize us. It's a tool that actually tries to correlate us with certain political parties when we talk about the civil society organizations participating in the civil society. Of course, we're trying to shape the politics in a way that it will be promoting human rights and freedoms, but it doesn't make us a pawn for or the backyard for that political party. It never means that. So it's actually very difficult. It's very valuable, but it's also very difficult. That autonomous space, preserving that autonomous space is very important. Who you are advocating for, why are you having that advocacy, to what purpose? We need to increase the environments to be able to do that. That's all I can say. Okay, thank you so much, Feray. I think with your last comments, you have answered some of the questions that we received in the chat box. Both you and Goran, you have answered some of the questions. I will turn to Goran as well. So we have about 20 minutes left, right, Ebru? Am I right? We will be wrapping up at 8. Turkish time. So I think Hakan Tahmaz, let me greet him by the way. I think Hakan Tahmaz has a question to Metin Bakkalcı. He says, if you reduce human rights violations to only state violations, wouldn't it be narrowing down the problem and avoiding a social solution with a social impact? Well, this is a question that we get very often. Sometimes the governments, the states,
devlet dışı örgütlerin insan hakları ihlalleriyle niçin ilgilenmiyorsunuz?
They also ask non-state actors in Turkey. The state asks the non-state actors, why are you not dealing with human rights violations? So, by the way, let me also greet my friend Hakan.
So, I would like to continue in the format of a normal meeting in giving my response. The first point I'd like to make is the issue of human rights is under the obligation of the states, governments. I'm not going to delve into a longer debate, but that's what I wanted to say briefly. That's the first point. The second point is I don't have a legal background, as you know. I'm from the health sector. We're talking about prevention of torture, but we all know we talk about humanitarian law. That is important. The third point, since 1991, in the field of human rights, the Oklahoma Declaration is referred to regarding armed groups. And this is carried to the agenda of the human rights organizations. In conflict, in areas of conflict, to the extent possible, I should say, in Turkish Human Rights Foundation, in Turkish Doctors Association, well, regarding all the conflicting sides, parties, regarding the violations, we have always made efforts to prevent the violations, and in the most recent conflict, Human Rights Foundation, Medical Association, the association, they were the ones who went to the conflict zone in the first place in order to identify the situation, take a picture, reveal the situation, and there are lots of international principles we would like to follow, and we're trying to do this to the extent possible. So it is obviously a responsibility of the states. And the protective actor is at the same time the one who may commit the violence. It's a paradox, but de facto regimes, non-governmental organizations, well, I should say, I'm not just referring to ISIS and the likes. All across the globe, there are armed groups, and this area should also be looked at. Hakan, I don't want to take more time. That will be it for my response. But I'm also curious to hear your views on that too. Thank you, Metin Bey. So there is a gray zone. Government-like agencies are also in play, and they grow in numbers. There's another question. This question to Mr. Miletic. I think this question was asked before, and Feray was trying to answer that. Let me see if the speakers have something else to say. The question is about the political sphere. Some groups are not in the political sphere, but they conduct political activity. This is the topic of the question. And there is one other remark made this is the following. Civil society should be located in the gray area between being political and being governmental. So they claim civil society is placed in the middle, in the gray area. Do you agree with this assessment regarding the gray area?
I think we should first define, maybe we misunderstood or something what I say. Politics is still, as far as I know, definition of political parties is still that those are the organizations who are participating in elections and want to become part of power. Even small, very, very small political party is going to elections and want to one day to participate in power, in executive branch. That's the still definition of political party. While civil society organizations are not doing that. They are representing citizens. They are groups that are in one association because of some reason. Those reasons could be really different. It could be some agricultural association, but it's still, it's different, completely different reasons. So there is a different perspectives, and we are not going. My organization will not go to elections in Sweden. However, there is in these questions that I see translated here, it says like that we are criticizing what is done by state. Yes, but that's not politics. When we are criticizing, we are saying if human rights standards are violated, that's power. So we are assessing if executive branch is doing things properly or not, is judiciary is doing things wrong, good or not, or wrong. So we are commenting that and calling authorities to change that. On top of it, we are calling Parliament to adopt some measures, including a law that will prevent some bad situations in the future. That's one part of the things. And that's not politics. That we are saying what are the standards and what should be done in one country or on international level. That's one part of the story. Another part of the story that what we are doing is with some so-called non-state actors. For example, what we are doing, we are finding that some paramilitaries did killings in Bosnia. So they are paramilitaries, they are not part of the state. But we are finding that they committed war crimes, and what we are doing, we are criticizing government that didn't arrest perpetrators and didn't bring them to the justice. So we are doing, this is all the time advocacy, lobbying, we are helping citizens, representing victims, and so on. But that's not the politics. We are in our work, we are not aiming to become a power, to become members of the parliament and so on. So we are very, very limited to our work and standards and so on. Of course, as I mentioned in my speech, there are some organizations in many countries, including in Sweden, that are close to one particular political party. Of course, this exists in some countries, but in general, this is not, or human rights organizations should not be a part of political, sphere. There is many other organizations in each society that are maybe more closer to politics, but I don't think so that I think that human rights organizations will lose credibility if they are if they, for example, participate in elections. So this is why I say that we should stay away of politics. In my country, in Serbia or in the Balkans, there is in some elections, there are situations when organizations support some political option openly, or some human rights leaders go on TV and say, okay, I'm supporting these political options. And there is a very big debate, should we do this? Or maybe we should not do this. Is this person is losing credibility in one hand, if you're supporting some political leader, or this is completely okay, because some people say, well, this is his private or her private sphere. I don't think so. If I'm quite visible in Serbia all the time in media, and I'm going tomorrow and support any political party, that I can disconnect that from my human rights work. I think it will be very, very hard. very hard if I'm going and doing vocal. But that's maybe my personal opinion. We are not, here in Sweden, we are not participating, in elections or saying any opinion about political party. We can criticize, we can sit with them on a table when they demand when we demand them to adopt some law, but that's it. That's it. But we are not participating in politics in a way of elections and so on. Thank you.
Teşekkür ederim bu açıklamanız için.
Thank you very much for this explanation. Maybe we can deduce the following message. Those civil society organizations working in the field of human rights are not acting to gain power, to be in power, but they are trying to influence those who hold the power. Maybe that's how we can wrap this up. It could be considered as a political activity, but the aim is not to come in power or gain power in that sense. Feray Hanım, I'd like to turn to you. There is a question that we want to refer to you. You have a human rights background, and you represent the members, the initiatives within the scope of your joint platform. Here's the question. The representative from the Violence Free Society Association, there's the question. The voluntary participation in the civil society is not strong, and this is a shortcoming. This is not a shortcoming specifically about Turkey. Many countries have that, especially in the field of human rights. Voluntary participation is not very high. This was the first question, the first remark. And the second one is the following. Civil society work, whether it's a professional activity or not, if this is considered as a professional activity, do you think this would hamper the spirit of human rights activities? Voluntariness and participation, how they are defined is important. Metin was talking about the establishment of Human Rights Foundation in Turkey. He also explained the process and referred to the contribution of the health professionals and the lawyers and how they fought against torture. Voluntariness lies at the core of that effort. In the Human Rights Association, that has a presence in many cities at local level in Turkey, and they have a high voluntariness level. It's quite strong. I think voluntarism has a different presence in big cities. Well, we can't talk about the voluntariness policy. By the way, I strongly recommend all of you, to go ahead and check the definition of the voluntarism. In the development plan, there is a reference to strengthening voluntarism. There is such a headline. I don't know why, but this sounds as threatening to me somehow. Strategic planning, that used to be state planning organization in Turkey, is behind that. Well, I was saying, when we talk about voluntary participation, it could manifest itself in different shapes and forms. It could be a donation. It could be personally going to places, doing physically things, or it could be sending out a social media message. It could be in different forms and shapes. It's not something easy to measure, voluntariness. It doesn't have to be something physical. Not it doesn't have to be a person physically coming to the headquarters and doing something.
Öğrenmek istiyorum. Mücadelenizi çok beğendim. Bu mücadelenin parçası olmak istiyorum diye gelenlerin sayısı giderek azalıyor.
I think there are less and less people who personally come and want to do something physically. Well, this should be understood well. For example, all the environmental movements are based on voluntariness. In Fatsa, there was this gold mine issue, and people were manifesting about that. And I think it is completely voluntariness. Those people going and displaying civilian disobedience for the sake of environment, that was also voluntariness. It doesn't have to be a physical production. One needs to look at the conditions of voluntariness. People come and put forward efforts. It doesn't have to be a financial contribution. It also has to do with internal relations. It's a two-way relationship. There are dark clouds around organizations. There is this threatening atmosphere. And there is a very negative perception sometimes, unfortunately, around such organizations, because some political leaders publicly making negative statements against our organizations. Well, how come can you easily find new volunteers? People feel threatened. That is one. Secondly, our country is becoming poorer and poorer. Poverty is increasing. And there's a big issue of unemployment. Very big. These all influence the level of volunteering. If one has a long-term goal and a vision, of course, people should be making efforts for that. And there is of course, it's important how you strike a balance between volunteerism and professionalism. This cannot be a profession. Civil society work, well, it can't be a profession per se. For example, in environmental impact assessment, you could work as an impact assessor. Yes, you could do that as a voluntary person, or you could deliver that service professionally. You could be paid for that. That's something else. So NGOs should have a policy about that. There is a distinction between professionalism and voluntarism. Sometimes the line is blurred, but there should be a line, and that requires a policy among the NGOs. By the way, if you consider volunteers as slaves, how come can you expect those people to continue to come and help you? Well, that's not going to be sustainable. By the way, most women organizations work on the shoulders of volunteers, mostly. And these days, they have very much resonating campaigns nationwide, all across Anatolia, and they're voluntary people. These organizations that conduct projects, that are given donations and funds, well, these people are not professionals. They're not making their lives out of that. That's not why they're doing this. So voluntarism is important. These are important concepts, and any confusion regarding these concepts shouldn't cause a fog that would reduce our visibility regarding the main issue. What I suggest is the following. I have been thinking about this panel for the past 2 days, and I have been thinking about ourselves for quite a long time. Can I have 2 more minutes? Sure. So 1. The government imposes this associations law, a giant bureaucracy, and it seems as if we accepted that. We should be objecting that. We should be debating on our own issues. We should be deciding on what to discuss. How can we define voluntarism? What is professionalism? And, well, by the way, representation, well, we don't represent anybody. We are intermediaries of those who should be represented. And we should be able to do that and discuss that by way of boards that we will form ourselves. Whereas now the law imposes us what we need to do, how we need to do that. We should be objecting that. We should be raising an objection about this. Thank you so much for your insights. Well, this issue is not usually well understood by some, and that's important. Voluntary participation, especially in the field of environment, women works, well, these are usually conducted thanks to voluntarism. Also, human rights movement, likewise. People who share certain opinion come together. We also talk about a narrow-scale civil society organizations, but we also talk about movements, larger-scale movements. This is also true for political parties. I mean, the workers for a political party is one thing, whereas the supporters of that political party, that's a different thing. There's a distinction. Well, we had 3 valuable speakers, and we are grateful for them. They gave us 2 valuable hours, and they were generous with us in sharing their experience and insights. And I believe the audience will leave this session quite satisfied. And personally, I found this very enriching. And before we bring this to an end, I'd like to thank Metin Bakkalcı, Mr. Miletic, and Feray Salman. Thank you all so much. And I would like to thank Hrant Dink Foundation for this wonderful organization. And I would like to thank our interpreters. We had 4 interpreters today. I hope I'm not wrong. Yes, as far as I know, we had 4 interpreters, and we would like to thank them all for the excellent interpretation. Although the speakers were speaking fast, they did a good job. And I want to hand it over to Merve Nebioğlu. She will be informing us about the coming sessions. Thank you all so much for your participation. Please share with us the 3 ideas you will leave this session with, takeaway ideas, and please continue to follow us for the coming events, and remember to fill in the evaluation form. That will be very valuable feedback for us. On April 21st, we will have our next session to start at 6 o'clock. This will be about identities, values, and social benefits. That will be the topic of the session. We will have a guest from Germany, KİDA, Emrah Gürsel, from Austria, Yıldız Tar, and Education Reform Initiative, Işık Tüzün, and Ferhat Kenter will be joining us. Ayşe Kösep Batur will be the moderator of the session, the next session. Thank you all so much, and we would like to thank the interpreters too. I was following the English version. That was very good. Thank you so much. I think there was a third language, Armenian. Yes, the meeting was in 3 languages. Yes, I was following the English version.